Welcome to what would normally be called the Political Beast podcast here on Wednesday, November 23rd, coming live from the worldwide recording studio for the podcast. Okay, well, all that being said, this isn't the Political Beast podcast. This is the Mod State podcast with me, Gabe Coker, the Political Beast columnist for Mod State, and my boss, the managing editor of ModState, Jonathan DeViney. Jonathan, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I was looking around for a second. It was like the fog thing, I didn't know who it was.
Yes. I mentioned jokingly the headquarters here in Raleigh, North Carolina. Political Beast
We
is
moved.
yes, we have relocated. I'd like to deceive our listeners into believing that Mod State has elected to send me on this trip to probe the minds of the former Obama voters who have helped to put Trump in the White House by coming here to North Carolina, interviewing them, which, Jonathan, I assure you I will be doing over the next few days. However, it doesn't hurt that I do have family here in North Carolina, and I needed to come up and visit for Thanksgiving anyway. That being said, I have elected, without your permission, but I hope with your blessing, to nominate this podcast the Thanks for Giving podcast. And what you and I will be discussing in the podcast is the reasons for giving thanks that we have to Donald Trump, his transition team, and to the various actors and actees surrounding the process that got him to power and how he's acted since. So,
Well, with that attitude, Gabriel, I'm pretty confident America will be great again.
well, let me ask you. You have family in swing states, especially in Pennsylvania.
Correct.
Tell me, because I don't. The closest I have is the immigrants who have fled the deep south for the northern portion of that part of the country here in North Carolina. What your family? You have family. Let's just get straight to the point. You have family in Pennsylvania, a much bluer state than the purple state that I'm in right now. What are these family members, these friends? What, as we're in this again, Thanks for Giving podcast, what did Trump give them to be thankful for that caused them to support his candidacy? I didn't predict Pennsylvania going for Trump.
It's an interesting question because not a whole lot of people did. I'd like to think that I was skillful in saying that Pennsylvania was going to swing his way, but maybe it was lucky, but better lucky than good, as the old the old saying goes. But I think, without getting too quick here, because I know we've got other things to discuss along these lines down the road here. But as far as Pennsylvania specifically goes, as I've told you before, my dad was born in Pittsburgh, and that's where our family originally made camp in America. But Donald Trump, in spite of being a billionaire who you would think has very little connection with the working class, he brought something to the Rust Belt, Ohio, Wisconsin, and so forth, and to Pennsylvania that was a promise to, as I've kidded before, kick over the tables in the temple and foment change. And you're talking about an area that was just devastated by the emergence of globalism. And there was a very real feeling that more of the status quo, for instance, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, was not going to bring about any sort of change that would be beneficial to those areas. And again, I don't want to get too deep too quick here because I know there's other things along these lines that we want to discuss. But that's in general.
And thank you for bringing us back to what I should have begun with, which is the schedule of the podcast. this Thanks for Giving podcast, we're going to talk some more about what we began with, especially about the message that was heard or perhaps not heard by the voters in the Rust Belt and here in North Carolina and in Virginia and in Georgia, about the message heard or not heard from either one of the candidates. But when we move through that, I want to hit a couple of important news items related to people's reaction to Trump since he's been elected. And then, with your permission, what I'd like to do is after that a rapid fire round where I throw some news items at you, some concepts at you, and get your knee-jerk response as someone who has his finger more or less, on the pulse. And then I'd like to do what are you thankful for, and I'll do the same about this political climate in which we find ourselves. And that could be any topic of your choosing. And at the end, what we'll do is what I like to call the In Mixed Company section of the podcast, where you and I will each throw out a topic that we would discuss at a cocktail party, something interesting. Doesn't have to be political. Can be something off the wall that you read, in a Dilbert cartoon. It can be a book that you're on, an interesting person that you've met. So we'll wrap up with that. But to go back to what we began with, you're talking about this reactionary attitude towards globalism, and the sort of brass tacks, rubber meets the road. The job that my grandfather had, that my father had, is not available for me or for my children. Pensions are disappearing. I want to ask you, and as you know, because you edited it, of course, I submitted an article to ModState attached, with a podcast with Mitch Tyner, the Florida campaign manager for Donald Trump, and the article was entitled "How He Won." And I've thought a lot since I've been here in North Carolina about following that up with an article of how she lost. And listening to some of the pundits who are, I want to say running around, but of course they're not. They're sitting around like chickens with their heads cut off on television. They repeated again and again and again before they began this desperate search for how they got it completely wrong, the Trump winning. They would repeat, and this is just my observation, but they would repeat a statistic again and again that Trump was the one demographic that he was successfully winning was the non-college educated white male. And it struck me, and again, this may be hindsight, but it struck me as I went back and listened, if I were, and I'm not, but it seems to me that if I were one of those non-college educated white males looking at the jobs, the heritage, the culture of my grandfather and my father disappearing, and then having a candidate promise to bring it back, and then having the media basically tell me day in and day out that I'm stupid, and that's the only reason I'm considering voting for this guy, it seems to me that would push me quite unbegrudgingly toward voting for Donald Trump.
That is a kind of common facet of human nature. It's like the old story of the little boy whose mother, finally, made him sit down. He said, "Well, I'm sitting down on the outside, but I'm standing up on the inside."
Right. Right.
We all did it as kids. You're told. My sister, when she was little, my mom said, "Melanie, don't you put one toe in that street." And she looked at my mother and then just stuck one tip of her foot in the street.
Right.
It's human nature. So, I'm sure she didn't know I was going to tell that story, but we'll just tell her we canceled the podcast.
That's quite appropriate.
Anyway,
Right.
yeah.
But that's what I'm.
Anyway,
That's what I'm trying to get at. What I'm trying to get at, though, is, you have family and friends, and you talk to these people, and
was it just rebellion?
it was it. How much of it was him, his message, convincing these people that he really could bring back what they felt like they had lost, and how much of it was. And I know we're a journalistic startup, so it's it's a little bit instinctual in us to laugh at and scoff at the mainstream media when they get something so abysmally wrong as they did. And again, in the interest of full disclosure, let's make sure that our podcast listeners remember that I predicted a 287 to 251 victory for Hillary Clinton. But that being said, I never, and this may be self-aggrandizing, but I never took those high school educated white men and put them in some sort of place of ignorance based on who they were supporting for president.
Well, I'll go ahead and say this plainly to begin with. If it had been said about any other ethnic group, it would have been called racist. Okay? The fact is, I mean, I would love to be in on the argument where someone says otherwise, but the fact is, white males are the only group in our country in which one can categorically say anything and it's okay. That's a fact. All right? So, yes, I think there was an element of being irritated because of being lumped in a group, but we're talking about people, human beings here that have experienced an immense amount of economic suffering and hardship that, correct or not, they look at policies like the Trans-Pacific Partnership as more of the same that began, they feel, and Donald Trump tapped on this, hit this repeatedly, they feel it began with NAFTA. And who was president when that came into being? The Secretary of State's husband. And fair or not, people looked at that as more of the same. And as we saw on Election Day, this is all hindsight at this point, but they looked at it, a lot of people looked at it more than just white males, okay? So was that a popular thing for the media to say? Yes. I don't think it did anything but cement his support amongst those people. And if nothing else, it generated a lot of sympathy for high school educated or GED recipient white males in other groups.
Well, if you're going to bring up, if we're going to discuss racism, though, and of course we could just
I don't want to go off on that tangent by any means, but I do want to make that is a valid point. That if it had been said about any other group, I mean, all right, let's flip this around and say that let's say the remark had been said by the mainstream media, a pundit, that the only reason blacks voted for President Obama was because he was black. Now, I've heard that said on the fringe, but nobody in the mainstream media could have kept their career intact if they had made those assertions early on in the 2008 race between him and Hillary Clinton.
But at the same time, if he hadn't, and again, I do realize we could spend the rest of the podcast discussing nothing but race and how it played into this.
Right, and we don't want to do that.
But if Hillary Clinton, no, let me say this: if Barack Obama had been white, I mean, surely Hillary Clinton's record and her positions are much more in line with what the average African American Democrat would want as far as policy, and surely has much more experience and a proven track record. So while if race,
senator, if I'm not mistaken,
if race didn't play a role more so among black voters than among white voters, then Hillary Clinton should have gotten more turnout than Barack Obama got in 2008 or 2012.
Right. I guess let's recalibrate here. I think the central premise to the story is that the media made a categorical assumption that almost came off, and I'm speaking from, ModState caucus members, the people in different states that have agreed to be polled at random about different things. they felt, and these are more than just white males, I assure you. One of them is an African American professor at the Kennedy School at Harvard, who felt that this assumption, this notion, was as if to say that being supported by white males without a college education is inherently wrong. And so that's more what I would say we need to get at here, is that it's as if, oh, well, if you're supported by white males with only a college or only a high school education, that's somehow indicative of a candidate that doesn't belong holding the office. You know, and because I agree, we don't want to get off the whole racism thing, because the word is just thrown around so much, it's basically without meaning anymore.
Well, and if I could offer an opinion, not being one of
you should
not I shall, sir. not being one of those. I mean, my education or lack thereof notwithstanding, not being one of these people who lived in a swing state, who saw their fathers and grandfathers, legacy being wiped away, and me not having the opportunity to, follow in their footsteps. All of that not being personal, to me, it still seems that those people would feel that they had more of an education, more enlightenment, more insight than any degree in economics or philosophy or urban planning, could ever give them.
They have real world experience, and you mentioned economics. That's the degree I'm currently pursuing, but it doesn't change the fact that there's plenty of people, I've had the privilege to know some, that have done, quote unquote, nothing more with their lives than be enlisted in, say, the United States Navy for 20 years and then retire to then pursue their education. You're talking about those people. And I say, the general you here, but when you categorically, you make a sweeping generalization saying non-college educated white males, you're addressing a wide swath of the population, because as they love to make just ad nauseum note of the leftists, whites are currently a majority in this country. So you're talking about an immense group of males here that, some of them, like my chief in the Navy in Bethesda before I left, he was just then wrapping up his bachelor's degree. And here he is, all he did was serve in the Navy for 20 years.
That's all he did.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very unfortunate thing if you're a Hillary Clinton supporter that was done, that was the MO, if you will. But it's like the old joke, all generalizations are false. It was definitely an unfortunate tactic, and if there was anybody on the fence, any white males without a college education on the fence, I'm sure that being labeled as being amongst the deplorables didn't really help tip the scales in her favor.
Okay, well, I look forward to actually speaking with some of these white males and others, while I'm here in North Carolina. So we talked a little bit about how he got there, or how she didn't get there, or perhaps how the media unintentionally helped her not get there. But now that he's there, let's talk about a couple of developments that have come along that haven't been discussed perhaps sufficiently by the mainstream media. Let's discuss this development in Arizona. Apparently we have the electors who were selected by the Arizona Republican State Committee to cast their votes. And of course, all of them pledged to vote for Donald Trump in January when they actually cast their votes. They've been inundated, all of them. Again, I think there are 9 total, have been inundated with, they've almost all had to take down their Facebook profiles, inundated with emails. They've stopped answering the phone. They've had to actually contact the FBI because of death threats in a couple of instances, because apparently in at least some states, perhaps with my limited research, it could be argued in all states, electors are not required by law to cast a vote for who they suggested that they would when they were selected. What are, I mean,
well,
what are,
in certain states they are, but that's not across the board.
okay, well, let's deal with Arizona, because apparently in Arizona they are not required by law to cast vote. I did a little bit of searching, and interesting. This might be a little bit of an aside, but if it is, it's fine, because I found it interesting, which means, of course, our
It's
listeners.
your party, and you'll cry if you want to.
Right. If I find it interesting, of course, our listeners will too. Mississippi.
It's better.
I know. Mississippi, duly noted. Mississippi apparently felt, in the Ford Carter election back in '76. Mississippi, with their four paltry electoral votes, were concerned that the election might actually come down to their four votes. It might actually that neither Ford nor Carter would garner enough electoral votes to carry the day. And as we both know, Carter won it quite handily, for reasons that we could again fill an entire podcast with debating.
Let's not.
But Mississippi actually convinced the Democrat Party, which dominated Mississippi politics at that time, actually convinced the majority of voters, not just the plurality, but the majority of voters in the state of Mississippi, to vote for unpledged. Like, that was literally on the ballot. There was Carter, there was Ford, and there was unpledged. And the majority of Mississippi voters voted for unpledged. In other words, voted for, they didn't know who they were voting for.
No one.
Right, voted, well, it wasn't no one. I mean, they were voting for electors, but they were voting for a group of
Right.
unpledged electors. And again, Carter won it handily, but those four electors ended up casting their vote for a senator from West Virginia who was retiring, and they cast it just symbolically. But this man won the state of Mississippi without ever having even suggested that he was running for president.
Right, in those states, they can pretty much vote for who they want. That's why you're hearing rumors of Mitt Romney and John Kasich now.
Yeah, so that my question is, how do, first of all, just at a most basic level, how do we feel about let's set aside how we feel about the threats. I would hope that all of us, anyone listening, would deplore that. But how do we feel about the concept of an elector having a pang of conscience and saying, this man doesn't deserve to be president. I made a mistake in declaring for him.
I think that's reprehensible. I think that's, as we would say in the Navy, for instance, and I heard it from other branches as well, but when someone was discussing something that was clearly out of their purview, not within their authority, we'd say, well, that's above their pay grade.
Why? Why? If we're arguing that they're not legally bound to fulfill their commitment, they change their mind.
I look at the founder's intent, what the framing was, and the whole purpose, whether people like it or not, is the whole purpose was to prevent, say, the state of California, Los Angeles, and Oakland, and New York City and Chicago from determining the fate of a national election, which if one strictly campaigned in big cities and they tend to go Democrat, well, we might have a Democratic president until doomsday. And that's rendering the votes of the rest of the nation irrelevant. That's the whole point of the Electoral College, is to make sure that there's a correct apportionment of the vote. Protect states like Mississippi from being relegated to the sidelines.
I'm assuming regardless of who you would have preferred to see as our president-elect, I'm assuming that you would have considered it, as I would, an honor to be an elector for my state, or you for your state of Louisiana. And regardless of who it was that you were called upon to cast your vote for, I would assume that you would have had no problem pledging to vote for who you were asked to, whether Hillary or Trump, and that you would have gone and fulfilled that duty, regardless
of Gary Johnson. I would have fulfilled the obligation that the people of the state of Louisiana, what they had indicated. If their will was Gary Johnson or McMullen or Bill Stein, then that's what I would have done.
So what if after pledging, you discovered that the person that you were pledged to, fill in the blank. I mean, just imagine whatever I filled into that blank was a fact or a reality that you discovered that, in your opinion, caused that person not to be qualified to be president of the United States. And I don't mean something like the fact coming out that they weren't born in this country or that they weren't of age. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about enough facts to where you would believe that this person was a traitor to this country or had every intention of handing over the nuclear codes to Putin. You know, something to that level. Whatever it is that you need to put in that blank, put it in that blank. Is there no scenario where you would change your vote?
I understand it's a complete hypothetical, obviously. In anything but the most extraordinary of circumstances, I trust the American people to vet candidates, and I don't believe the American people would permit that. But you're going along with if they didn't know. If it was something where obviously, okay, I got a call on the golden telephone from the pearly gates, all right, and it was blatant, okay, this person is going to betray this country and we're going to be, every desert here is going to be glass because of it, then obviously we're talking about a different situation.
Okay, well, let me dial it back. Let me dial it back.
Of course, as a patriot would feel compelled.
So let me dial it back to reality then.
Yeah, let's do that.
In your mind, there's no scenario based on anything approaching your perception of the reality in which we live, where any of these electors could conscionably change their vote and cast it for someone other than Donald Trump.
Or any candidate. I believe that the job of an elector is to fulfill the obligation of the state, in which their party has appointed. Because that's something we've got to clarify here for our listeners that are unaware is, for instance, my Uncle Bob was a backup elector in the state of Louisiana in one of the elections in the 80s, I believe. I think it was 84 or 88, I forget which. But if something had happened to one of the already selected electors for the Republican Party that he was a member of, then he would have cast his vote. And it would have been his job to say, okay, the state of Louisiana selected, in 84, say, Ronald Reagan, then that's who he cast his vote for, because that's what the will of the people was. And I will quote our current president, Barack Obama, here, when he stated in a speech to the NAACP in Cleveland a couple of years ago that the highest ranking person in a representative democracy, a federal republic, is the private citizen. And again, the will of the people, the American people, have vetted these candidates, and however they have voted in your state, I believe that, yes, in accordance with the framers' intent, you are obligated to vote along the lines of the people.
All right, so moving on, I'm going to ask you a quick question that deserves a very lengthy answer. But give me a quick answer because I have a nuanced sort of aside that I want to kick us into. What is your opinion of Trump's decision, apparently based on the the rumors coming from a staffer who wasn't supposed to talk about what she overheard at the New York Times interview that Trump is not going to pursue legal action against Hillary Clinton?
What is my perception of.
What is your opinion of his
If that's
decision?
reality?
His decision apparently not to go after her. Quick question, because then I want to get into the congressional
obviously
side.
It's the
of it.
walking back of a pledge. I mean, he never used the word "I promise you" that I'm aware of, but he made it pretty clear that he wanted to pursue action, and it may be something strategic. I thought about this, and I'll make it real quick. But there's been talk of what if President Obama, on his way out, decides to pardon her. Well, President-elect Trump may be thinking of this in strategic terms, or strategery, as W might say. He might be thinking, the more of a case I make here verbally beforehand, the more pressure I might be putting on the outgoing president to pardon her. So he may be thinking, I'm going to let this topic lay low and see if he won't pardon her and we can pursue action then. I don't know. I really can't verify that.
Okay, well, his braggadocious strategery aside, the primary question I wanted to ask is the Congress shows absolutely no interest in retarding, abating, casting aside, the investigations. They're absolutely ongoing. Do you think
right, especially as pertains to the Clinton Foundation? Yes.
Well, the Clinton Foundation, but also the emails, and specifically the FBI's handling of the investigation and subsequent reinvestigation.
What, Chavez, is that his name?
Right. What sort of, and again, this is showing a little bit of my lack of knowledge when it comes to this specific area of governance. The president's disinterest in pursuing legal action against former Secretary Clinton. What, if anything, does that have to do?
You're referring to President Obama?
No, the president-elect.
Okay, I just want to.
Thank you for clarifying. The president-elect's apparent disinterest and the president's obvious disinterest, but the president-elect more specifically. What, if anything, does that have to do with Congress's power to pursue the secretary?
Well, it's a bit sticky here because a lot of people were voicing concern, and some of the media even voiced concern that, the FBI should have indicted her. The FBI doesn't indict anybody. The FBI makes a criminal referral, and obviously they declined to do that. And so at this point, what Congress, the House of Representatives could do, if in lieu of meaningful testimony, they could hold her in contempt of Congress, which, depending upon whether it's a whole declaration of the House, carries varying penalties. But I'm not really sure what direction it would take at this point without the Department of Justice being on board with it. And I don't foresee that happening as long as Loretta Lynch is Attorney General. I'm not seeing it in the cards here. So which way now, St. Peter, seems to be the question. If the president-elect does decide to pursue this, then is it going to be a criminal referral handed to the new Attorney General when there is one? I mean, this creates a whole litany of potential showdowns in the Senate and confirmation battles. I mean, the Attorney General pick could have a great impact on where this goes, and it's all for nothing anyway if President Obama pardons her. So this could become an even more severe mess than it's already been.
So it sounds like, to wrap up, it sounds like President Obama, if the Congress, over the next, what do we have left? 2 weeks after they get back from recess, if the Congress shows a sincere...
Oh, they're on recess?
Yes, we are.
Oh, I hope they have a nice rest.
I know.
They've earned it.
Well, yes, so they can do nothing, get reelected, and then go home.
Oh, stop it! No, but seriously, they'll continue.
Do nothing, right? I have to say, in some ways, being a small government man myself, it's sometimes it reminds me of the time that Nancy Pelosi and the Democrats stomped out of some hearing about one of President Bush II, one of his Supreme Court nominees. They stomped out of the hearing, and they held a press conference. And I remember thinking, man, I wish they would do that more often. I wish they would just stomp out and go home.
There's a couple of wonderful caveats here. For seeing her in action, it's like watching the town drunkard from an early Irish novel. It's like there's no telling what's going to come tumbling out of her gaping maw. But beyond that, you mentioned something that the Democrats have certainly come to regret, regardless of what your position is in our political quagmire. Senator Chuck Schumer, I'm sure, regrets the words, and this was over a year out from President Bush's departure from office, when he said, basically, I don't care, we're not going to hear another Supreme Court nominee, which then led into this most recent fight over Supreme Court nominee Merrick Garland, where Senator Mitch McConnell basically fair play, and no problems running our.
So again,
it's just sticky all around.
So when it comes to back to what we were discussing, when it comes to Hillary Clinton and her potential legal difficulties, sounds like what you're saying is Congress shows an actual affirmative desire to go after her. Then what it sounds like is Obama on his way out pardons her. Trump doesn't have to worry about it, and Congress gets to shrug their shoulders and move on.
Well, if President Obama pardons her, then it opens up, obviously, a lot of opportunities for best-selling books by different ne'er-do-wells involved. If he doesn't, then you're going to have a showdown, I predict, for the Attorney General, because I'm sure President-elect Trump is not going to want Loretta Lynch to remain in that position. Then you've got a fight in the Senate over that. Then in the House, any sort of decision by the House Oversight Committee or whatever committee of the day is after Hillary Clinton, then let's say they decide to hold a vote to hold her in contempt of Congress, then that has to go to the floor of the House of Representatives for a vote to hold her in contempt of Congress. And if that occurs, I'm pretty confident it'll pass the House. Now, to what the penalty is, that has varied in history. So again, there's so many different variables here, and they could still vote to hold her in contempt regardless of a pardon, but it wouldn't hold any punitive reward.
All right, well, let's move on to what I hope will hold some sort of importance and interest for our listeners, and that is our rapid fire round. I'm going to throw it. I am going to. Yay, he says, with contempt, fear, and excitement equally mixed.
Yeah, I don't know what this holds.
Okay, all right. So these are going to be 3 topics that I have not screened with you or anyone related to you, connected to you, attached to you, or attached to me. These are simply 3 topics that I may or may not have come up with while I was making this introduction to the rapid fire round. All right.
Oh, Lord.
I'm going to throw this at you and come back to me as succinctly as possible. I'm not going to give you a time limit, 10 seconds. No, I'm not going to give you a time limit, but just throw back, just knee-jerk what comes right off the tip of your tongue, top of your head.
Good thing I don't have Tourette's.
Bannon's appointment as chief strategist for Donald Trump.
I'm sorry, say again?
Bannon's appointment as chief strategist for Donald Trump. Bannon of Breitbart, alt-right supposed fame.
Right. Steve Bannon, if I remember correctly.
Steve Bannon.
Quite possibly, regardless of what you think of him, the most polarizing pick that the president-elect could have made. For a number of reasons. I mean, Breitbart itself is fairly or not viewed as a mouthpiece for the so-called alt-right, and he has certainly never shied away from controversy. It's a very tough pick, I'm sure, for some people to swallow.
The wall, built or not built?
Will it be? Will it be built?
That's the question.
Beyond the wall we have right now, I'm going to say no. They might upgrade the current wall, but some massive Great Wall of Trump type deal, no.
The Cubs win the World Series with the questionable pitching bench. The Saints struggle to remain relevant with possibly the best quarterback in the history of the NFL. Explain.
The Chicago Cubs, well, even a blind squirrel finds an acorn once in a while, and even the dumpster gets a steak every now and then. So, as far as the New Orleans Saints go, and Drew Brees, he's performing beyond what anybody really expects of a 37-year-old quarterback. Unfortunately, especially recently with the improved play of the defense, he just has had a penchant for. He likes to throw to the other team in the first half, and that's troublesome.
I love, even being a New Orleans native and a diehard Saints fan, you still said penchant, not penchant.
Well, the thing is, I mean, just like I told my wife that I would love to name a son Jean-Baptiste, for instance, but in the rest of the South, it'd be Jean-Baptiste DeViney, so we can't do it. We can't do it.
Okay. All right. Well, this being actually, and I'm going to go ahead and give you away, Jonathan, this being actually Thanksgiving Day, because it is 2 o'clock in the morning on Thursday, not actually Wednesday, as I announced at the beginning of the podcast. Let's say I'll go first. What we are the most thankful for in this political climate. And I, who was an enormous fan all of my life of Meet the Press, I am extraordinarily thankful that Chuck Todd, the predictor-in-chief and one of the most leftist mouthpieces of the NBC conglomerate, who has taken over this absolute temple of, and I don't say that sarcastically, I mean that sincerely, this absolute holy place of news, which is Meet the Press, has had absolute, utter, unmitigated agony Sunday after Sunday since he got it so abysmally wrong. Seeing him wallow in the misery of his own wrongful-headedness, if that's a word, along with braggadocious. Seeing him wallow has actually caused me to enjoy watching Meet the Press again. So that's what I'm thankful for in this political season.
Seeing everybody scramble all over themselves.
Chuck Todd's misery. And that's just emblematic, of course, of the rest of the mainstream media, but him in particular. That's what I'm thankful for. So take it away.
So just, the whole premise of chaos, is something that you found great delight in.
Right. All right, your turn.
I'll say it's a two-parter. But
it's cheating. It's cheating.
Okay, I'll stick with the main one, and with a slight dose of sobriety here, and I'm not referring to ethanol in our bloodstreams, but with a bit of gravity here.
It's Thanksgiving, Jonathan. It's Thanksgiving. Come on, we can be excused.
Well, I am in New Orleans, okay, so it's like it's 5 o'clock somewhere, but we really don't care.
Right, exactly.
It's, whatever time it is, That said, I actually am very thankful that we live in a nation that, whether or not it's great, people misuse the word great. Its original intent was to refer to notoriety, not goodness. So I'll leave it to others to decide on that. But we do live in a country that is known for its peaceful transition of power. And aside from a few aspiring vagrants to make a wreck of the place, the vast majority of Americans have displayed, once again, the ability to, whether or not we appreciate the results of the election, notwithstanding, we've shown the ability that we're once again going to make that peaceful transition of power. And I'm very thankful for that, because not all countries can make that claim. And I know that may sound cheesy, but it's true. It's something we take for granted. I mean, even after the disaster that was Watergate and the president's resignation. In a lot of countries, that would have been cause for a coup, and it wasn't. And once again, after one of the most polarizing elections in any country in modern history, we stand to make a peaceful transition again, and I hope it's one that is marked by healing and the people coming together to affect some real positive change.
Well, you having taken the high moral ground in that segment.
Oh, I have to once every decade, you know.
Yeah, you called it potentially cheesy. I would call it grounds for, were we in the same room, me, punching you vigorously in the shoulder. But
a vote of no confidence in the managing editor.
Right. Come on,
he has no confidence in himself.
He takes the high moral ground and then he pulls rank, and this is for you listeners to judge. All right, our in mixed company section. This is where I began with the what I'm thankful for. You allowed me to wallow in the moral ditch of Chuck Todd and took, of course, the moral high ground of your gratefulness for the peaceful transition of power.
Down there on Twitter, if you're not careful.
Well, that being said, I'm going to allow you to go first in your in mixed company section. When you're in mixed company, again, sipping whichever of the 15 cocktails that the DeViney family imbibes on Thanksgiving Day. What's the fun fact, the interesting personage or documentary or book that you're reading or news story, if you want to go there, that's fine, that you're going to bring up that's not going to cause someone to throw turkey at you, and that people will actually find, if not gratifying, if not enlightening, at least interesting.
Well, I'll leave the turkey sling to my older brother. He tends to, some people push the envelope. He tends to torch it.
He's going to hear. You do realize he's going to hear this podcast in all probability.
Oh my goodness, yeah, they're going to be waiting with bated breath to take away mine.
Is this your in mixed company contribution? You're talking about your family on this podcast. Is that really?
See, I hardly know what to say because so many people have felt that I don't belong in such companies. I said, it's really,
Are you recusing? You recusing yourself from in mixed company?
Honestly, and this is a bit self-promoting, but then again, we're both on the staff of ModState, and it's a ModState podcast that people will voluntarily listen to. So, obviously, they don't mind.
I will allow it.
Their presence. Silence is concession, and I can't hear them right now. So I think we have just enough content that I would love to actually bring some of that up for my own family to hear. I might play a portion of the podcast you did with Mr. Mitch Tyner. Once again, as copy editor Al Aldine and I discussed earlier last night, you did a fantastic job of posting that with Mr. Tyner,
Thank you.
And it was definitely a very good podcast from his input, and kind of sets a high bar that I'm sure we'll be able to meet, but it will take effort to meet it in the future, but it sets a solid bar for, if nothing else, if not for our readers, but for us to meet, because we've come so far. It's hard to imagine, really, that we launched, on the 30th of April, barely over half a year ago. And, so, you mentioned rank. As I've long said, we all work together. Y'all worked with me, I worked with y'all, and somebody's got to have the unfortunate job of the 51%, and so in the rare situation where we have to split hairs, I'm that guy, but it's been a privilege to work with you, and I'm honored to be involved in the podcast with you. You've done a great job thus far.
Well, thank you, Jonathan. Obviously, no reason, for me to be inaccurate when I.
You wipe those tears right now.
when I stroke your ego by saying what a privilege it is to work with you. I'm going to leave our listeners with this. My in-mixed company thought for the day, I guess I would say, is go back and take a look at the United States electoral map, county by county. Now, I don't mean go and look at each individual county. I mean, look at the country.
I was going to say, okay, Karl Rove.
In red and blue. And realize when people say this country is divided, yes, numerically for whom we cast our votes, yes, obviously, mathematically we're divided. But you look at this country, realize that this country is not divided. The reason you see these mass protests in Oregon or in New York City, these communities are not divided. These communities are united, as are the communities in Mississippi and Georgia, and mostly here in North Carolina, as I've found. The reason that that's important is not to point out that Democrats have all moved to areas where they all live, and the Republicans all live where they live, and that we've separated ourselves from each other. No, the point I'm trying to make is regardless of how bad you believe a president is, the state and local governments, these elected officials whom you can go knock on their door and you can go pull them out of their chair in the state senate or the state house.
Oh boy.
Those men and women that can actually see your face and actually hear your voice, those men and women represent you, and those men and women feel the way you feel. That's why they're there, is because they feel the way you feel. And no president...
I rest my case from the Electoral College. Thank you, Gabriel.
No president, so long as those men and women are doing what you say and what you elected them to do, no president's going to be able to bring this house down, period. And take comfort in that, regardless of which part of the country you fall.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's something my father made the case about numerous times in my lifetime, but even recently, is that the president is, regardless of our incoming president, is like the position of a CEO. Whether you like it or not, they appoint people, they can veto legislation, they can order strikes on another nation, but there's only so much power on a micro level they have. If you want to see laws changed, presidents can't introduce legislation. If you want to see laws changed, if you want to affect change on a broad scale in the system, then you need to get just as involved every 2 years you do every 4 years and change your representative or reaffirm them in their position. But those are the people that, the power of the purse, the budget, whether they passed one in the last decade or not, that's the House of Representatives' responsibility. So if you don't like the just bloated federal budget, then you need to campaign for a congressman who's committed to fiscal conservatism. That's not the purview of the president.
Excellent.
That's a good point.
Excellent response to my in-mixed company comment. Jonathan, thank you so much for being with me here on this.
Thanks for having me, Gabriel. It's been awesome.
This awesome first cooperative solo, or I guess I should say duo, Mod State podcast here on Wednesday, November 23rd.
I'm not that thin.
Let's be honest, it's actually November 24th. Thanks for listening to The Political Beast.
Happy Thanksgiving.
The Mod State podcast. Happy Thanksgiving.